Okay. I'm hoping that we are now live. Welcome everybody to Talking TSR. My name is Chris, and over to my virtual left, depending what Zoom decides to do today, is my co-host Rick. And then we also have a very special guest with us today, Tim Wadzinski, who will be joining us for a little bit of an interview and a chat as well. So how's it all going, guys?
Doing good. Still not gaming face to face, unfortunately, but riding it out. My gaming group. We're continuing to do the electronic thing right now, which is good. And I found a newfound love of figure painting. Have ordered more figures than my budget can really handle. I'm painting them a mile a minute. And every so often, I'll send a photo. I'll text a photo of a dragon or something to my players, and they'll kind of text back, when are we encountering this again? So it's very, very cathartic. How are you holding up, Tim?
Yeah, pretty well. Thanks for having me on here. This is really cool. Yeah, I've sort of made the jump to online gaming too. I'm actually playing in a weekly 5e game for the first time in a really long time, and it's pretty cool because it's like dads and their kids, so we're all getting to play with our kids or our friends'
Nice.
kids, so it's kind of neat.
Cool.
Nice. Excellent. So, all right. So we do have the chat open out there. So everybody, let us know if you can hear us, if the audio is all good and everything. If you guys got any questions for any of us, throw them out there. We'll try to keep an eye on them as we're going along on the show. And we'll try and make this a little bit as interactive as we possibly can this day and age. So, yeah, I've dabbled a little bit with online gaming as well. I did a little bit of Roll20, which is a great setup, by the way. I mean, the prep work, yeah, it's the downside is the prep work to get everything all set up, to get your maps in there and your characters in there and everything. But once you've got all that prep work done, it's a very intuitive system, and it works very smoothly for 5th edition. So definitely like that. But I have to admit, though, the prep work kind of is a little bit of a barrier. So I've been thinking about using Zoom or Google Hangouts or something, and getting a webcam and just putting it down on a screen and actually moving minis around and stuff like that. I also took the plunge literally earlier this year at PAX, which was in December, and bought a couple of sets of Dwarven Forge, which I've always wanted to. And then the world fell apart, and now I can't. Now I just look at my box of Dwarven Forge terrain. So hoping that I could bust it out and use that at some point.
Just set it up and play with it, Chris. It's okay. No judgment.
Oh,
that's
I
right.
have. Definitely. And then I'm like, boy, if I just had 5 or 6 more sets, I'd be in great shape. It's another $1,000 and I would be set with some nice dungeons.
Nice. Chris, you also have a big change on the horizon. Is that right?
I do. So for those of you who don't know, in the real world, I like to call it in the real world, but this is going to be not necessarily the real world anymore. I was an aquatic biologist, and I've been in the industry for over 27 years, and I am throwing that all away and joining Goodman Games full-time starting next month. So I am beyond excited about that. And Joe has way too many cool ideas for what he wants me to do. So, but I'm excited, and I think we're going to do some really great things, 5e related, and maybe even some other things too. So definitely, everybody, stay tuned on that. And all right, the chat's coming in. Thanks, Julian. Yes, thank you. Right back at you, man.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, yeah. So
big things on the horizon.
They certainly are. So let's not let our guests sit any longer here. The whole reason, not the whole reason we're doing this show, but a big part of the reason why we're doing this show is we wanted to have Tim on. Tim, for those of you who don't know, well, I'll let Tim actually introduce himself. So for those folks who don't know, I think people probably know a little bit about Rick and I at this point, being that this is episode 3. Tim, when did you start playing D&D or role-playing games, or what was your first role-playing game? This little thumbnail sketch of your background.
Well, I'm a child of, born in the 70s, but junior high, grade, 1981. I had a friend in homeroom who had it was the Moldvay Basic set, the one with the awesome Errol Otis cover, the purple pinkish one. And he grabbed a couple of us and said, "Hey, I got this cool game. Let's check it out." And I said, "Okay," and I had no idea what it was. I hadn't heard of D&D at that point. But we just rolled up characters, and he was playing a weird hybrid of, I didn't know this at the time, but it was a weird hybrid of AD&D plus BX, basic expert. And we just rolled up characters, and he made up adventures, and we just played in homeroom every day, and I was hooked. I had found my brother had some friends who were interested in playing, so my mom got us the basic and expert sets, the BX sets from the local Ben Franklin, the old 5 and dime store, and my brother and I shared them. And he eventually moved on to Top Secret. That was his thing, and I really liked the fantasy stuff, so I stayed with D&D. I started collecting AD&D books. I got them as gifts, birthday presents, that sort of thing. My grandmother, God rest her soul, rest in peace, she financed my habit for years. She got me a subscription to Dragon magazine, starting with around issue 71 or something. Got me books. There was a killer toy store near her house. She would get me Grenadier lead figures to paint, modules, all kinds of good stuff. So basically since 1981, I played every edition since. Prefer to be a dungeon master, but I love to play. So it's
excellent. Great.
Are you actively running a group right now, or?
No, right now I'm playing, which is pretty cool. My game time is really spent working for Goodman Games. So I don't have the time right now to really put together a campaign to run anybody through to the level that I would want to.
Sure.
I'm very, very content to be a player right now. It's nice to be on the other side of the screen. It's
a lot less work, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it can be. I mean, it depends how closely you build your character in your path and everything. But yes, it is definitely a lot less work.
This is true. Yeah. So why don't you tell everyone what you're doing for Goodman Games right now?
Well, right now, and for the last couple of years, I'm the line editor, I guess, for the original Adventures Reincarnated line, which you can see behind Chris. There is the cover of our second book in the line, The Isle of Dread, which are these massive 300-page tomes where we're going back and taking the old TSR modules, and Chris and Rick and Michael Curtis and some others are converting them to 5th edition, adding a ton of new content, and then I get to edit and make suggestions and help out where I can. But the books they're a ton of fun to work on. They're a lot of work. So that prior to that, I was also working on the 5th edition fantasy line of modules, sort of the standalone one-off modules. We did, the first one I did was number 3, The Pillars, and I probably did about 10 or 11 of those editing wise in a row, and then the big book started up at that point. So that's where my time has been spent for the last few years, is horror line. Keep on rowing, we like to say.
Yes.
What we like to say. Excellent. Cool. So have you thought about branching out into anything else besides the editing world, or are you content to wield your red pen?
I mean, sure. Like, we were chatting the other day, and Rick said every editor he knows, there's somewhere in there, there's a desire to write. So yes, of course, I'd like to, but again, I'm pretty finicky, meticulous, whatever you want to call it. And if I were ever to write something, I would really want to spend a lot of time getting it right. And I don't know if people would want to work with me in that regard. They'd probably be frustrating to work with.
Thanks for the comment. We love the OR line too.
Yeah, meticulous is a good word to describe you, Tim.
Yeah.
Very good word.
But a good editor is a meticulous editor. And for people I've worked with editors in the real world for many, many years, decades. And having a good editor is essential, and I think it's one of those thankless jobs that if the editor is doing their job right, you don't notice anything, and that's kind of the best way it should be. But yeah, I think editors are terrifically underappreciated, so we definitely appreciate what you're doing, Tim.
Like someone put in the chat there, fastidious. Yes, I love that word.
That's a great word. So
yeah.
So Tim, tell us a little bit about one of your other passions and kind of how you kind of got started with writing and editing in the first place.
Well, being like I say, being a teenager in the '80s was a great time for movies, and the thing hit, and also music. I'm a metalhead, '80s metalhead, and a lot of that stuff just kind of naturally went together. It's great to sit down and listen to bands like Iron Maiden or Manowar, Judas Priest, some of those '80s heavy metal bands that are still kicking, which blows my mind. These guys are all pushing 70 years old and they're still out there doing it. But I love listening to that kind of music. There's a lot of fantasy imagery in there. You could listen to a Manowar album and watch a Conan movie, and you don't even miss a beat. It all kind of rolls in together. And actually now when I edit, I have this huge mix on Spotify of instrumental heavy metal stuff that I put on in the background when I'm reading, and so there's no lyrics, so it doesn't distract me, but I can pay attention. But yeah, Yngwie Malmsteen. There's some newer bands in Europe like Hammerfall and Rhapsody. It's just D&D metal. It's fun. It makes me feel 14 again. It's like I like to stay in that frame of mind, and pay attention to what I'm doing, but still feel like a kid. And, so the music was a big deal. I actually started a heavy metal music magazine and e-zine on the internet. I did it for like 20 years, which is amazing that I'm that old. But I was able to meet and interview a lot of rock stars that I admired, and I did a lot of album reviews, concert reviews, that sort of thing. So doing that for 20 years and editing people's stuff to make it look cohesive and getting press releases from various PR firms and just trying to make it all look nice. That I guess that's where my editing I came from. I don't have an English degree or anything like that, so I don't have that in my formal background. But it just sort of developed over time, and then I discovered Goodman Games at Gen Con. Some friends of mine played in the tournament a number of years ago, and my wife was pregnant at the time. I couldn't make it that year, so their team name in the Goodman Games tournament was Tim's Not Here, and they placed. And then the year after that, they had such good luck without me, they wouldn't let me join the team the next year, and then they won. So then I was like, I got to learn more about this Goodman Games, because that's all they talked about was how cool the tournament was, how great the adventures were. And then a couple of years later, Joseph was putting together the DCC RPG, and I actually play tested a game that he ran at Games Plus in Mount Prospect, Illinois, which is one of the greatest FLGSs out there. And I was hooked. It was a great game. And soon after that, he put out a call for a proofreading squad. And I think like 1 million people signed up to proofread the manuscript. And so my wife and I actually did that for a little bit. And it was fun. It was fun for me to do on the train, commute to work. I would proofread things and send my comments in. And eventually he said, you know what, I really think you have a good eye for this. I'd like to, hire you, and you can work for me. So I'd love that. So that's how I got in right around the time of DCC RPG going live. There were a few DCC modules I got involved with. Just the whole vibe of the Goodman stuff. I love it. It got the old school vibe, TSR early D&D vibe, and it's got some crazy heavy metalness to it that it appeals to me. So it all ties together great for me. It's perfect fit for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm not music buff. I mean, I listen to soundtracks basically when I'm writing. That's the extent of my musical knowledge. But I've had some great texts from Tim where he'll be editing one of my encounters and he's like, dude, this is like an Iron Maiden song, such and such and such and such. That's exactly it. And I'm like, yeah, no, I never heard of that before. And it's like, but you got it all. Like you caught all the pieces of it. And I'm like, sorry, lost on me.
That's see, now I'm going to have to start thinking about expanding my music that I play. I do play music when I write, and it's like you said, Tim, you can't do lyrics because it doesn't work, because you start thinking about the lyrics in it. Yep. It gets you off. But I've been going too mellow, and my musical tastes are across the board. I'm a huge fan of music, just about every genre of music there is. So I might have to start edging back to my 20s and go a little heavier. And if Joe Goodman starts seeing more creatures in my, more savagery in my modules, I apologize in advance, because it's the music to blame.
Well, there's another show topic right there. Music and gaming.
Music and yeah,
another one. So these topics just keep presenting themselves without even trying.
Yeah. So Tim, it's also it's kind of our understanding that you know some TSR artists.
Well, that's kind of an interesting story. With started a few years ago. My buddy and I, Andy Freelink and I, he actually has some design credits in DCC RPG. We were running a game at GaryCon, and it was really cool. It was affiliated with Gygax magazine, and we actually got to run it in the room where the altar or the homage to Gary was set up in one corner. So it was pretty cool to be able to run an AD&D game in that room next to the table that's set up with his books and dice and his Hawaiian. Our group was an independent filmmaker named Brian Stillman. So we met. He had a lot of fun in the game, and we kept in touch after that. And I found out that he was working on a film, which is out now. It's called Eye of the Beholder. It's a documentary about the art of Dungeons and Dragons. And he lives out of state, and he and his filmmaking partner, Seth Polanski, were coming into Lake Geneva to interview, I think it was Jeff Easley, maybe one or two other artists, Chris Arneson, who actually works for Goodman, who knows a lot of these guys. And I volunteered to drive them around while they were shooting their B-roll footage after they finished their interviews. Because I don't live too far from Lake Geneva, about 45 minutes south of there, so it's not too far. And I spent several hours with them. I had a trunk full of my D&D books in case they needed to shoot any covers or anything. So I had this trunk full of contracts.
Did they have to shoot any covers?
Yeah. No, they didn't. They had all they needed, but I popped the trunk and they're like, "Oh my God, why do you have all that?" So it was just funny. But I drove them around to, Gary's old house at 330 Center Street, and where the Dungeon Hobby Shop used to be, which is now a chocolate store, and where a couple of the other office buildings used to be, and they shot the footage. And so we went to dinner that night, and Jeff Easley and Chris Arneson were there. So that's when I got to meet those guys. And then over time, I branched out. Again, GaryCon is great for meeting people. I met Diesel through Chris Arneson and Brian and a couple others. And then I was able to interview Diesel for our book, number 3, Mission to the Barrier Peaks. And he had a lot of great memories from his time working at TSR to put into that interview in the book. It's great if you haven't read it. And then not just artists, but again, with GaryCon, we played in a tournament game run by Harold Johnson, who was with TSR forever. He's done everything for TSR. He's seen and done it all. And I was able to get in touch with him and interview him for The Lost City, which is number 4 in the Aura line, which just came out. And another really cool thing about Harold was he runs a bookshop in Lake Geneva. And Chris Arneson and I went up there for the day and had a little photo shoot with him. And it was pretty cool, just walking around the place and taking pictures with him and having him explain some of the other old, haunts and things that they had done back in the day at TSR. And they actually had in the bookshop that day, I forget the manufacturer, maybe it was Bally, but the old Dungeons and Dragons pinball game. And they had a piece of artwork pinball game there in the bookstore for sale. And we were both drooling over that. We really wanted to buy that, didn't have the money.
Wow.
But no, it was cool. It's cool to be somewhat close to Lake Geneva. And actually, I was talking about my grandmother before. She actually brought me up to the Dungeon Hobby Shop when I was a kid. And I still have the catalog that I picked up when I was actually in the hobby shop. And she bought me the old Intellivision game, the AD&D Intellivision game. I still have that on my shelf here.
Wow. And
a set of Grenadier miniatures. And I got in the car. I couldn't wait any longer. I tore the wrap off as soon as we got in the car. And remember, Grenadier used to put in randomly gold-plated figures. I got one of those. And I mean, that just sealed it. I was like, TSR, D&D, Lake Geneva, you got me for life. I'm in.
Wow. That is so cool. That is so cool. And Harold is, when I hear Harold Johnson, I think storyteller is the word that comes to mind. He just can spin a yarn and you just sit back and you just listen and you just enjoy. And he'll go in all these different directions. And I think the interview that you did with him for before Lost City, was very reminiscent of that. It went in all sorts of directions, Dragonlance and everything, and he just has so much to tell, and he just wants to tell too. So he's a great interview, great guy.
That was great. And I have to say, Tim, now you've made me doubly jealous, because as a youth, I would always buy the Grenadier figures. And I went to the store once with a friend, and he bought an orc box, and I bought like Fighting Men or something along those lines. And he got one of the gold. The kid right across the street from me got one of the gold-plated figures. And now you have to tell me that. So I seem to have gold-plated figures swirling all around me, but I can't get one myself. I'll have to start haunting eBay.
Well, it was funny because I thought it was solid gold as a dumb kid. You know, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be worth $1 million. You know, and no, but it's still awesome.
That's great.
So, yeah, not after you broke the shrink wrap, it wasn't worth $1 million.
No, and like I'd sell it. I mean, do any of us ever get rid of our games? No, I mean, no,
not by design.
No, and who didn't have the Grenadier figures at some point? You know, we might be using plastic and this and that now, but I think everybody had those Grenadier figures.
Lead, heavy metal.
Yeah.
The true test, though, Rick, did you paint them with Tester's model paint like I did, like the idiot I was?
Yes, I did.
Yeah,
I
did the same.
I had some Knolls that I painted, and I remember they came out this very weird glossy color, because a lot of the Tester's paint, the greens and such, were vivid and glossy, and and it's like I was saying earlier, like now I've gotten very into the figure painting because I find it very cathartic. So I've learned to, like, you know, dry brush and wash and all that fancy stuff. And back then I was a kid and I was just slathering it on, you know, basically. And everybody, it's just like the Grenadier figures, everybody had Tester's paints, because I think every kid did a model, or, you know. I used to do the Universal horror movies models, so I had the Mummy and Godzilla and King Kong and all those things, and, you know, we would paint them with Tester's paints. So it was a rite of passage.
That was the thing back there. Yeah, definitely.
Tester's all the way. Thanks for the comment. That's great.
Awesome. So, all right. So awesome, Rick. Well, Rick, Tim, any other comments or anything? I think we're gonna keep Tim around for our discussion of Ore number 2, Isle of Dread, because obviously he was the editor on that too. So we would like to have some of his feedback on that too. So any other final questions or anything for Tim to chat? Any questions for Tim via chat? We can stall for a second here or two and see if anything comes in.
Okay.
So people
while we're waiting, it was funny. I brought this Intellivision game to GaryCon one year, if you can see here.
Oh, look at that.
Luke Gygax was walking by my room in the hotel, and I happened to have a copy of our Ore number 1, Into the Borderlands, in which he has a cool piece where he reminisces about playing that as a kid. And I asked him, he came into my room and he signed it, and I had this Intellivision game. I said, would you sign this? He's like, I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm like, but it's D&D, you're Gygax.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really
and
cool.
Then somebody asked this beer bottle.
Yes,
you got to show that. This is great.
Clyde Caldwell, one of the great TSR artists, his artwork, which graces the cover of a Goodman Games module as well. What is it? Dragora's
Dungeon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the same piece of art is on this beer that I found, and it's
and was that was that actually like a Clyde Caldwell beer, like a small batch run of beer, or is it just to put the label on it?
I think the company thought the art was cool and bought it from Clyde or something like that.
Oh, gotcha. So,
and I bought it, so it worked, right? I mean, it's all marketing.
Well,
right?
yeah, exactly. Right. So it worked perfect. Yeah, I think Joe had a couple of comments about what you put on the cover of modules to get things to sell. I remember. Awesome. So so how long does it take you to edit the new releases? I assume he means by the new releases by doing one of the Ore books. So run us through that about like what your process is on that.
Well, first, I have the modules, the originals, which is good. Otherwise I would get them somehow, acquire a PDF online, buy a PDF, read through it. But first things first, you got to read the original, make sure you understand what's going on. Right? And we get the manuscripts from you guys, from the others. and try to read. What's interesting is a lot of questions usually, and I'm not shy about texting Chris or sending emails to Rick or Michael Curtis. And it's hard to just put a time box around something like that, because some of the writing is more detailed. And when you start getting into stat blocks, and especially inline stats, like where you take a monster from the monster manual and list it, but it has alternate weapons or different armor, or perhaps the spell list is a little different. That takes more time to weed through that to make sure everything's correct and the caster's the appropriate level to cast those spells. We also like to make sure that the spell names haven't changed from the old editions to the new editions. We want to make sure everything's correct. And then you got to stay on top of the errata that gets published to make sure that, you know, we're current on everything. So it depends. As far as like a word count or something, boy, I don't know. I don't even know how many words I can do. You know, it really depends on the material. And you get into a good flow, and it's hard to stop sometimes. My wife will make me stop, but you know, I want to keep going through it because the stuff's interesting. I love the way these are coming together. So it easily takes at least a month, maybe 2, to get through one of these books.
No, that's I'm not surprised by that. I mean, it takes months to convert them, and that's, you know, that's because we all have other jobs that we're doing too. So it's not that they're able to focus on these, you know, 50, 60 hours a week. You know, it's more like 20 hours a week, and in between, you know, different things going on in life. So oh, that's great. That's fascinating. And correct me if I'm wrong. So when you were commuting back and forth on your train ride, that's when you did a lot of it, correct? You were at a...
Yeah, I have a long train ride. Well, not now, of course, but when, you know, before the world changed, I had a long train ride. I'd spend about 3 hours a day commuting. I'm sorry? Sorry, Chris, I think I was talking over you.
Can you guys hear me? Because I can't hear Tim. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So apparently I can't hear you guys. So we're just going to plunge along. All right. Well, thanks everybody for participating and with the chat. We appreciate that. So we're going to keep Tim on here, and I think we're going to move on to our discussion of ore number 2, the Isle of Dread, which was the second one. So Isle of Dread was the first hex crawl module, wilderness crawl module, put out for the expert level, expert rule set for D&D, and it was included in the expert box set. I believe that's how I got my original blue covered copy. And there was a second copy. So this is the beast right here. I showed it up earlier. You can see that right there, and that's the cover of the blue version. That was the original publication, and then I believe it was the off the top of my head, 3rd or 4th printing. I believe it was. I think it was I'm going to say 4th printing. Yeah, I can't remember if it was 3rd or 4th. Was the orange cover, and that was the different TSR logo. So this was the second in the line of the ore modules. So we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into it. Oh, look at that. He's got some of the original ones there. Nice. And we're going to talk a little bit about a couple things. So Rick, why don't you kick us off? Get us going on
sure.
Isle of Dread.
Well, first, you know, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is Sandbox Adventure. Probably the first real sandbox adventure I think that a lot of players and a lot of DMs ran across. You know, 1981 I think it was released, and yeah, I mean, just for that alone, that kind of makes it very historic. And you know, mentally I had to sort of double check, because I know Cook was one of the authors, and Cook also did Dwellers in the Forbidden City. There you go. And Dwellers in the Forbidden City is also sort of a sandboxy type adventure, and they really came out. There you go. I love that cover too. They really they came out about the same time. I think they both hit in 1981, though I'm not really sure the exact timing, but if I'm not mistaken, they came out the same year. So it's interesting to see which one was first. But I think most people probably encountered Isle of Dread as their first sandbox adventure. And as Tim just showed the map, it was the first encounter I think a lot of people have with what I call an edge map, which is where you show the edge of the map filled in, and then the players usually get a map where the inside is sort of the fog of war. There you go, thank you. And the DM has the filled in version, and I love that. I think for that alone and the way it drills down into little areas, looking at it really critically, I think it is one of those modules where it's almost more the sum of its parts. Looking at the individual encounters, there's no individual wilderness counter that blows me away. The dungeon I like, but it doesn't, I don't think, blow me away. And yet, for the sum of its parts and what it does and the way it shows areas on the map and then drills down into the pirate layer and into the Phantom layer and these different areas, I love that to death. And it even kind of inspired me at one point to do my own island, which was based on the Isle of Dread and also love of certain things from a kid. Growing up as a kid, I loved the movie King Kong. It introduced me to stop motion animation and a lot of things, and I found it fascinating. And the Journey to the Center of the Earth and those kind of burrows type things. So, yeah, I think for that, it's awesome. How do you feel about it, Chris?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot of the awesome points about the sandboxing part. I think it was just, in my opinion, it was a blank canvas. It was like, here's an island, here's just a bunch of encounters on the island, and there's dinosaurs running around, and it caught a lot of different things. It really was a great module just to throw a setting out there at you, and that's where we get the term sandbox from. And then it's like, well, then do what you want to do with it. And I believe there was some adventure hooks in there, but it was really designed for the game master to kind of take that whole that whole island and all those encounters that really were not connected. Actually, really none of them were connected to each other. A couple of them you could easily connect together and kind of thread a story there. But really kind of piece it all together. And I think, I think a great point about you would have a location in a specific hex, and then you would have an individual map of that lair or that cave system. And in the original one, in the original module, there was actually a cave A and cave B, I think they were called. Yeah, Tim's going to show it right here, where they basically said for the ogre lair or the troglodyte lair or the Neanderthal lair, it's like you use one of these two maps that they pretty much put out there for you and said, just grab one of them, and that's the cave system for the ogre lair, and then use the other one for the trog lair. And they were like, that's your springboard to create your own maps. So when we did the conversion, I thought a really cool thing to do is to just do that. We left those two original maps in there for the game master to use. But then I took those encounter areas and I gave them their own encounter areas. I just developed the maps. Very similar, 5 or 6 encounter areas, but I put a little bit of spin on it. I added a couple of trap areas, like in the ogre room, in the ogre lair, and just to kind of put a different spin on it and say, hey, here's what you could do with it. You could do this on your own. And then I had a lot of fun creating, I believe there was 24 of the original encounters that were designed on the island, and I think I then designed 20 additional islands. Actually, the map was starting to get a little bit crowded. I was actually having to get careful about not having too many of them too close, even though the hexes were like 6 miles apart or whatever, or 6 mile hexes. So they really weren't on top of each other, but it didn't make too much sense to have some of these encounter areas kind of be on top of each other, especially if they were an established lair. So that was a lot of fun. Rick, I want to go back to Dwellers of the Forbidden City for a second, because that is a fascinating module. And I did pull my copy out earlier this weekend and just kind of take a look at that and refresh my memory. And yeah, that really was very, very similar to the Isle of Dread in kind of its presentation. You actually had a couple of dungeon levels in there. Where that was the entrance to kind of get into the Forbidden City was kind of set like in a rift. And so there was a couple of classic crawls. But then, yeah, then you had this wonderful map, and most of the map was not detailed, much like the Isle of Dread. So you just had buildings upon buildings and different little interesting features. But then some of them were, you know, you had a couple of interesting encounters. You had the stockade of the bullywugs, and you had the tree guys, the Taslow. You had the tree folks. You had I believe there were vines hanging down with giant wasps or something that you could climb down or whatever. So yeah, it really was very, very similar. You could see the correlation. Obviously, you know, David Cook did Dwellers of the Forbidden City, and he was one of the designers on Isle of Dread. So I guess I've never made that connection before we were talking about it this weekend. So I'm fascinated by that. So I'd love to hear what you think about Dwellers of the Forbidden City, Rick.
Yeah, I almost like I love both of them again because I like jungle and island environments. You know, even one of my recent fifth edition fantasy projects, I went with a tropical theme because I think it's a great underused environment. I think sometimes people write off certain environments that are extreme and they don't want to do an Arctic environment or a jungle environment or a desert environment or things that kind of get out of the temperate zone. And I understand that, but I think it's a cool place to go because there's so many interesting animals and wildlife and what have you. And Cook did a really good job of, like you said, of incorporating wasps. And I think they had humanoids riding wasps in that encounter. And the entry, and I believe it was like a several different route entry kind of dungeon, the way he had set it up, where you could take a couple different paths. There you go. I don't remember the name of the humanoids. They were like a jungle humanoid too. That was, I think,
Taslow.
There you go. I knew it began with a T. I wanted to say Tabaxi, but I know that's the cat guys. And it's a great dungeon, and I kind of look at them as sister products. And obviously Cook's mind ran in that direction, he was good at it, because there you have, I think, the two best examples of sandbox adventures that a DM could want, and they're early, but they still hold up very solidly. And like I said, I think both they're better than the sum of their parts. When you look at the whole package, not only is there a lot of material in each one of those products, but there's so many avenues to expand, and it's almost impossible to read either book, I think, without, if you're the average DM, without your mind churning with the possibilities of, you know, what buildings in the Forbidden City you can fill in, or, you know, what areas of the island you can populate with your own creatures. Like I said, it literally, the Isle of Dread inspired me to come up with my own island. And even the Lost City, I've kind of worked on, you know, lost elven cities and things like that. And I think a lot of the development of that owes a little something to Cook's writing. So yeah, two great companion pieces. What are your thoughts, Tim?
I love Isle of Dread. You could tell by how beat up my copy is. I mean, I run this thing a million times, and it's funny that getting that sandbox adventure as a 11 or 12-year-old kid, opening up that box set and getting that, and you see the dinosaur on the cover, you're like, oh, this is gonna be great. But then as an 11 or 12-year-old first time DM, I didn't know what to do with it, because you know, it's so much easier to run a dungeon crawl because it's so much more straightforward, right? And I mean, I remember playing D&D with my friends in my backyard, sitting outside in the summertime playing, and it just fumbling my way through a hex crawl for the first time. And then, you know, as you get a little better, a little more, you know, refined, and I remember again running it for my college group, and we had a lot more fun because I knew what I was doing at that point, let's say. Yeah, no, definitely Isle of Dread. I prefer that over the other one, simply because I've run it more. I, honest to God, I don't know if I've even run I1. Let me pull it out again. I mean, this one is in almost near pristine condition for being as old as it is, because I don't think I've ever run it or, you know, abused it at the table. I do remember reading through this and thinking, oh boy, you know, again, as a young DM and, you know, 12, 13 years old, whatever I was, and feeling a little overwhelmed by it, perhaps. So I hate to say I wimped out on Mr. Cook and his Dwellers of the Forbidden City, but I think I did.
I can
Yeah.
see that map being a little daunting.
Yeah, it was.
When you look at that,
I couldn't resist the bullywugs. The bullywugs are awesome. They're still my favorite.
I could see that.
So
I can,
yeah.
knowing you the way I do Chris now, I can absolutely see
Oh
that.
yeah, love big huge fan of the bullywugs and the Aboleth, which both made their premiere here in Dwellers of the Forbidden City, and you can certainly see those connections with Isle of Dread as well. You know, the Kopru are kind of a slimy, kind of a precursor to the Aboleth. You know, we didn't have serpent men on the Isle of Dread. Probably one of the few things that we didn't have. But you know, we got those in Dwellers of the Forbidden City. And you know, just bringing it back to the jungle setting, and like you said, Rick, on how it's kind of underutilized. And that's, you know, jungles are dangerous. I mean, come on, even today, jungles are mysterious and dangerous, and you know, there's poisonous animals, and a lot of them are, you know, not explored fully, you know, down in the Amazon. And so I think that's that part of it makes it, you know, it kind of ups the level a little bit on well, now the environment can beat you. Not only the monsters can beat you or the traps can beat you, but the actual environment can beat you down as well. And I think that's a great setting. And then when you throw it on a jungle island, almost like a Caribbean, it's almost like a trick again, because it's like, it looks like paradise, but it's deadly at the same time. You guys know I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And in Rogue One, when they went to there we go, the Datalorian over there. When in Rogue One, when they went to Scarif, the planet where the Death Star plans were, and it was a tropical paradise, quite frankly. That was really turning things on its ear. It was and it was cool to see stormtroopers and death troopers running along a sandy beach, and rebel troopers and everything. Basically, like, they all went on holiday and then got into a big battle. But it worked. It was a little, at the very beginning when the ship was landing, it was a little bit unusual, but then you kind of got used to it after a while, and you're like, yeah, all right, you know, a tropical paradise planet, I get it. And then you kind of got into it. So definitely a great inspiration for that. So and I love that. And I do want to mention, just in case, so to make sure people are aware, so the FEF module that Rick was mentioning, Secrets of Mistcutter Island, there's the awesome cover, and I love that.
There we go. That's what I was grabbing.
Yeah. What number was that, Rick?
That was number 17.
17. So that is actually, it's an indirect tie-in with the Isle of Dread. So that was being done as we were putting Isle of Dread together. And I dropped a couple of subtle hints to Rick that, you know, hey, you know, if you kind of make it Isle of Dread, like, you know, this could be a small isle right off of the Isle of Dread. And you can just drop that right in, and there you go. So you know, again, kind of keeping that sandbox theme going, and giving even more tools for the game masters to actually utilize. So like
that's
that.
actually, like, that's a funny story too, in a way, because I had included a reference to the Kopru on Mistcutter Island in this adventure before you asked about connecting to Isle of Dread, and of course the Kopru were sort of like the ultimate villain, you know, that are you eventually unearth in the Isle of Dread. And I remember thinking, I hope it's okay that I'm referencing these classic creatures from way back when. I thought it'd be a nice little Easter egg. And then when you talked to me about connecting the two, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. So
yeah.
And there are frogmen in the adventure, so I figured that met with approval.
Yeah, it certainly did.
But yeah, I think the influence of the Isle of Dread on the Secrets of Mistcutter Isle are, like, kind of unmistakable when you look at it. So again, both modules really had a big influence on a lot of the work I've done. Definitely more than the sum of their parts. And you know what? We didn't even mention, I also just thought too, I think X1, the Isle of Dread, was the first time the known world setting was mentioned. It
Yes.
was, I know it pre-existed that module, but I think that's the first time in print, or the first time in a module, certainly a TSR module, that known world was referenced. I was always a Greyhawk guy. I'm not as knowledgeable about the known world setting, but that was, I think, the first reference that was ever made to it was in the Isle of Dread, because there was
Yeah,
a map in there.
there was the map, and there was a very small gazetteer, and I remember one of the feedbacks from one of the early reviewers was they wanted more, and I'm like, nope, that's not what we're doing here. We're not it's like that's a whole nother product line
Yeah,
that we're not getting into. But yeah, that was the first one. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I have a couple of Easter eggs hidden around the Isle that reference some very well-known things in the known world, in addition to my regular Easter eggs. So there we go. Yep, there's the
there we go.
continents of the known world. And then the Isle of Dread. Yep, go up a little bit. Yep, Isle of Dread way down at the bottom there.
Yeah,
So
right there you go.
yes, and of course nowadays your Isle of Dread, comes to you from the elemental plane of water, and shifts back and in, which is intriguing.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I like it because yes, that just brings a little bit more usefulness to the setting, where you can kind of drop it in everything. It is such a kind of an oddball setting, but that certainly makes it a little bit more useful. So Rick, tell me about so your influences. So obviously you were saying that King Kong was a huge influence when you were gaming early, and me as well. I'm assuming you cut your teeth on the 1977 version, I think, of King Kong, or were
yeah.
you
Oh
actually
yeah.
go back and see some of the other ones?
Yeah, no, I saw what I'm assuming was the original version, which was a kind of fairly gritty version, I think. But I grew up as a kid. I think like a lot of young boys, I was the dinosaur in that. I think young girls were during that age anyway. Growing up in the '70s, it seemed like if you were a young girl, you were into horses. If you were a young boy, you were into dinosaurs. So I grew up going to the Museum of Natural History because I was close to the New York area and things like that. So when King Kong came out with the animated creatures and this sort of Harryhausen type stop motion animation, I ate it up. And it was, I think one of my goals in life that I haven't met yet that I still love to do is I wanted to get my hands on a stop motion T-Rex, an honest to God T-Rex with a ball and socket armature inside. And I actually taught myself to even do stop motion animation and made some stop motion 8mm movies and things like that, all based out of this King Kong influence. So yeah, that whole thing. And like you said, it's dangerous because if you watch any of the versions of Kong, even the more recent, the Peter Jackson version, as soon as these poor people get on Kong Island, they're in trouble. There's an instant,
Yep.
danger everywhere. And that was incorporated in multiple modules. Even Gary Gygax's Isle of the Ape really made a lot about the environment, rotting spell books, and that there were no places that the characters could go. If they would hover in midair, a pterodactyl might get them. If they would climb a tree, there were snakes. Like he made a point in his intro, I remember, to the Isle of the Ape, to say there's no safe place for adventurers to hide on the Isle of the Ape. And it was such a dangerous place. I remember he said his playtest group, they decided not to leave the island as soon as possible. And thinking on the Isle of Dread too, I guess it's sort of I don't know if you call it an Easter egg or a homage, but there is an early encounter where there's a great wall near the one native village, and to me that's the Kong wall. That's
Yeah.
that was very much a sort of enormous wall that you didn't want to go past. And even present day, when you think of Jurassic Park, where they had the great big doors that would swing open to Jurassic Park, to me that's a King Kong wall. It tells you that beyond that point, you're in trouble. The dragons swim beyond there. And that's the beauty, is it takes adventurers really out of an element, because even though dungeons are maybe a little easier for DM because you have a more constrained environment, there's some safety. You can even have a trap riddled dungeon like a Tomb of Horrors type of thing, but there's still passages and places where things are relatively quiet, where the adventurers can camp down. But in the wilderness, anything can happen. And my group, they know I dig that sort of thing. because again, another influence, like growing up, I used to watch The Land of the Lost, if you remember that. And
Oh yeah. It's a classic.
I, not too long ago, I had something where I won't make a long story of it, but basically my characters, they did something with the Amulet of the Plains, where they brought an amulet of the plains accidentally through a magical portal. And I decided I was going to have this cause a calamity. And I basically threw them into the Land of the Lost. And I played it exactly like the Land of the Lost. I had pylons and dinosaurs and crystal tables and all the
Oh
stuff
yeah.
from the show. And I think only one of my players knew the Land of the Lost that well, that the poor guy was trying to remember from his youth anything he could to help the players get the devil out of there. But that too, it was very much a dinosaur land kind of environment.
Uncle Rick. Was it Uncle Rick? I
So
forget.
yeah,
That was
Sleestack. There you
the
go.
Slee Stacks. Yeah,
Exactly.
that was a great show. And I
Yeah,
mean,
who
that
didn't
was
love the
that
Sleestack as a kid? They could never hit anything with all those javelins they threw, but they were still kind of
never.
cool to look at.
Yeah, there were stormtroopers, I think, before stormtroopers were around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So,
prehistoric
yeah.
stormtroopers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what's underneath the white armor, Slee Stacks. So that's great. Yeah, I'll have to admit that's probably one of the best parts of doing one of these projects is going down and diving into some of the source material that inspired the original modules. And even some of it's bad. Some of these movies are not good movies, but I watch them anyway. I'm a huge Mystery Science Theater fan, so I can sit through some bad movies. I mean, I riff them constantly, and my kid's gotten very good at it as well. But it's still it's important because you really get the feel for it, and you really kind of immerse yourself into the setting. And I watched Jurassic Park again. I know Jurassic Park. I even watched the new Jurassic Park. That was just that was a mistake. But anyway, I watched that one anyway. I just wanted I was like, hey, it's like I'm doing the Isle of Dread. There's lots of dinosaurs. I want to see dinosaurs on a big screen. I want to just see some things and sure enough, I'm like, yeah, all right, Spinosaurus. Yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. Let's throw one of those in there. So yeah, and you get inspiration from all these different media. And it's great. It's fantastic. That's by far it's the fun part of it. That's why I'm always bugging Joe ahead of time, like what's going to be the next one before I actually start doing the next one, because I like to spend my time grabbing some of these old movies, digging up some of these old novels. I'm not a fast reader, so it's like it takes me a while to get through some of these books. So, so yeah, that's definitely a fascinating part of it. Just kind of learning some of what the other inspirations were from these authors, and then trying to get into that mode, and joining up and doing it.
And movies are a valid form of inspiration, I feel, because my own writing process, I like to think I designed some decent set pieces, because people have called that out in reviews of some of my books. And every set piece I write, I think of it in movie terms. I picture it in my head. I see the scene. I see the characters running through and doing whatever they're doing, and then I basically am just transcribing what I see in my head as a sort of the 8-year-old filmmaker is still shooting the scene, except after a while I learned it's a hell of a lot easier to write than to try to make movies. So basically now I just transcribe it. But yeah, it's all good inspiration.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris,
No, I
remember when we were doing the Isle of Dread, and that movie, the Meg, the shark movie, was out right about that same time. And I remember you and I talking about it, and I think we altered one of the, I don't remember if it was a random encounter or a set piece encounter, but we included a megalodon just because that movie was out. So yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's fun to take inspiration from stuff like that. And I remember being a kid and loving the Isle of Dread and just being completely oblivious to all the source material that they probably had looked at before compiling everything that went into that module. And then getting a little older and being able to seek that stuff out and read it for yourself and see where the inspiration came from in the first place. You're like, oh, okay, that's a lot of fun to be able to discover that stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Obviously, I think I knew back in the early '80s that King Kong was obviously a pretty big inspiration for it, but I didn't realize all the others. And was it Edgar Burroughs? His one story, he's got I can't remember. It's the one where they're tunneling down through and they get to the underworld city. Very reminiscent to what they were going for in Isle of Dread. And there was literally a lizard, a giant lizard that breathed fire. It wasn't a dragon, it was a giant lizard that breathed fire. And right in the pages of the monster manual, fire lizard. I mean, and it's like, and reading the description, I'm like, that's it. It's like, that is the monster. It's like, you can, and for me watching that it was amazing, because I was like, whoa, okay, fire lizard. I know where that came from now. And it's like, I was watching it with my kid and my wife, and they were just like, they knew nothing. And I was like, but it was cool for me. So definitely a great inspiration. So excellent. So, all right. Any final, anecdotes or metaphors or anything on the Isle of Dread? There's a lot, probably. There's a lot of island there.
There's a lot of island. There's a lot of island there.
A lot of dread too.
Yeah. So I named a lot of chapters. I put the word dread in a lot of my chapters.
Oh yeah, Chris. I know you named the one chapter More Dread. Was that a pun? Was that a King Arthur joke, or were you just going for?
No, again, King Arthur. No, more. Oh, wow, I get it. Wow, no. See, the man, he's meticulous. He's fastidious. So it's like, no, not at all. I was just saying there's more dread. Just there's no King Arthur there. I don't know how you could get King Arthur on the Isle of Dread, but that's a good one.
You're creative, man. You can come up with something. I have faith in you.
So yeah, I got a really good one in my next one that I need to definitely put in one of the designer diaries I spent a lot of time on. So a nice little Star Wars homage that no one will probably get. So awesome. So all right. Well, again, it looks like we're coming up to just about the end of our show here. So a couple quick announcements. So we are actually going to be coming back at you guys 3 weeks from now, not 4 weeks. So 3 weeks. Which is going to be Sunday, August 2nd at 10 p.m. That's our regular time slot. So that Sunday night would have been the end of Gen Con. So we've decided we are going to do a Gen Con themed show. Rick and I have a lot of really fond memories of Gen Con. So we're going to talk about that. We're, maybe we're going to come up with a top list of some of our Gen Con memories, or maybe some of the cool RPG events we've played at over the years, because I've played some really crazy RPG events at Gen Con. And how does it tie into TSR? Most people might not realize, but TSR used to own Gen Con back in the day. So there's a lot of good tie-ins there. There's an excellent book that's now already over 20 years old. Throw that up there too. The 30 years of adventures, the whole history of Gen Con. So I pulled that out. That's on the book that's off the bookshelf for me to take a look at. So August 2nd, 10 p.m. That'll be our next show. And then with that, I think we're going to jump into our Pearls of Wisdom. So Rick, do you want to jump in with the Pearl of Wisdom?
Sure. Well, again, based on our discussion tonight, and I guess this Pearl will be aimed more at the DMs who are watching, I would say, don't be afraid of a sandbox adventure. Absolutely run one for your group, or better yet, run a couple for your group. Because there is, even for myself, there's a certain comfort of dungeon passages, because no matter how unpredictable your adventures might be or your players might be, a dungeon environment is a constrained environment. If there's a passage that goes down and it branches 2 ways, generally the adventures are going to go 1 or 2 ways, or they're going to camp out or something. Where the big city or a big island or some place where the adventures really have no constraints, it can be frightening and intimidating for a DM to think, to be able to handle that. Do it. Because as a DM, it's a great developmental experience. It will grow your skills as a DM. And for your players, it'll be a hell of a lot of fun. So that is my Pearl of Wisdom.
Great, yeah. And it's along a similar line with that too. So I have a 17-year-old son now, and he loves to be a game master more than a player. Don't know where he got that from, but same thing. He's kind of stuck to the the dungeon crawl style and setting specific style, and now he's starting to branch out into more the open-ended. The characters can go anywhere, and it's difficult. It's definitely a challenge. It's the next step that you take. The training wheels kind of come off. Not too unsimilar. We mentioned Top Secret earlier. I have a buddy who's running a spy game right now. Modern gaming is like that as well. There's generally no walls keeping you in. You can go and do whatever you want to do. That's not easy for a game master. It's very difficult. It's very easy for a game master to over prepare and prepare too much material, and then also to not to be a little bit too heavy-handed when guiding the party on where he wants them to go. So it's definitely a challenge to kind of put that all together, but definitely the next step in the evolution of a game master. And it's great that I get to watch my son kind of go through that evolution right now. So it's really awesome. So,
and the circle continues.
Exactly. Tim, any final parting words? Our pearl of wisdom is the final kind of little nugget or something that we've gained from the show, or just to call them anything out. So,
well, just listening to what you both just said, if you can, play with the next generation, play D&D with the kids. It's refreshing. The session, the campaign that I'm in now, it's really cool to be an old guy like me, and I'm set in my ways and all that, but then you play with a 15-year-old kid, and they're into the role playing, and they have a lot of creative ideas, and just be open-minded, listen to them, and say yes and go with it, because it's fun. And then
Excellent.
For music, okay, you got to listen to the band Gygax. One of their albums, like the vinyl opens up and becomes a DM screen. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And they sing about old school D&D topics in their lyrics. It's great. And then there's other bands like Visigoth and Rick. If you're into Tolkien, you got to listen to Blind Guardian, German heavy metal band. All their stuff is about
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for that. So we thank everybody for joining us on our journey again this weekend. And we're going to be back in 3 weeks to talk some more TSR. So everybody have a good one. Be safe out there. And we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.
See you in 3 weeks, folks.